Okay, so today you all have the handout for exercise 206. We're going to go through building more tubular shaped objects, round objects, that sort of thing. I'm going to explain the sweep command so that you have a better idea how to make these sorts of shapes. And I'll do a few examples that aren't part of this just so that you can see kind of what some of the capabilities would be. Remember, next Monday is Labor Day, so you won't be here, or you can come, but I won't be here. So I doubt the lab will be open. So hopefully you have a good weekend, and we'll reconvene a week from today after break. You guys did get your assignment 201 handouts, right? Did I make that copy? No? A lot of you are staring at me blank. I couldn't remember whether I did or not. Okay, then I will make that copy and give it to you today. It's posted. So that you can look at it. I apologize. It's due in like a month, so you have plenty of time to work on it. So I'll get the actual date off the handout. But such is life. This is what happens. I couldn't remember whether I gave it to you yet or not. So I will give it to you a little bit later today. Okay, so I'm going to go ahead and start up Rhino again. And this is not directly building upon what we did last class. It's another skill builder exercise. But we will ultimately combine these two together to make something once we start doing some more texture mapping next class. So for today, I'm going to continue with a brand new Rhino file that is again in large objects inches as my template. And I'm now ready to start modeling. If you're missing the toolbars, the V-Ray toolbars, I can talk you through loading them again. But for right now, I'm just going to continue on with what we're drawing. So in part one, I have a little drawing that represents kind of the base of a little tube that we're going to make. You can actually see the tube a little bit further down in 3D, so you can see where we're going with it. But I'm going to start with a curve or a set of curves to start to illustrate what that is going to become. So I'll start with an arc tool right here. And there are several different arc tools to work from. And so depending on what you're trying to make, it can be easier or harder to do that. So this first one isn't bad. This one is not bad either, the start, the end, and the radius. It just depends on how you want to model. So I'm going to go ahead and start with this center and then start in the end. So the center of the arc, I know that I want it to be 2 by 2, which means it has a radius of 1. But I can, or excuse me, it has a radius of 2. I don't know how I messed that up. Yes, it has a radius of 2. So I can go ahead and type coordinates of 2 inches, comma 0 as my starting place, which would be the center of my arc. And then 0, 0 would be one end. And then we can see that I'm obviously going in this direction. And it would be 2, comma 2. You would think that I would have been able to do that, right? 0, 2 inches. 2, 0 there, and 0, 0. And I think it just wants a direction, yeah. So there's my first little curve. I can look more straight on. I could be drawing this in the top view instead of in the perspective view. It's a simple enough little drawing so that it shouldn't be too hard. The overall length of this straight piece is 13 inches, so I'll type 13 inches. And I'll go ahead and hit enter. Now I could go back to my arc tool and once again, I can use my smart tracking to create this like that. Or I could take the first piece and I could use the mirror command, which is under is it under edit? No, it's under transform mirror. And I can mirror across this line to create the second point. It doesn't really matter how you do it, right? There are many ways of doing it. Once I have those three pieces together, I'm going to join them. So I'm going to select all three of them and type join, or go to edit, join. And the purpose of this is so that it is one curve that I can work with and assess here. Okay, so now that I have that curve, I want to rotate it up into the third dimension. So again, we're repeating a lot of the same stuff that we've been doing day after day after day to make you more and more comfortable with it, or the hope is to make you more and more comfortable with it. So I'm going to go ahead and use the rotate 3D command. which is available under Transform, Rotate 3D, or I can type Rotate 3D. And I'm going to start my rotation axis along the x-axis here, along the base of my curve, right there. And then I will drag up the y-axis here as a reference point, and then I'll fold the shape up into the third dimension. Okay, so now it's standing up on edge, which is exactly what I wanted it to be. And so now we're going to start figuring out how to make this shape, this simple curve, into a tube, right, or into a rod, so to speak. Everything in Rhino is hollow, so technically it's a tube, but we can imagine it as a solid piece. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to draw what the cross-section of this shape should be. And so in this case, I want it to be a circle in cross-section. And so I'll go ahead and pick on the circle here. And I'm going to click on one of the two endpoints. It doesn't really matter which one. I'll do it at this one. And I'm going to specify that the diameter, so I'll type D for diameter, of this should be a ½ inch. So 0.5 inches. And I end up with a little circle at the end of this line. Right? And for some reason, that goes, yeah. So let me explode. Don't know how I'd manage that. Make sure that this, and that's below too. Huh. All right. Give me a second here to sort out what happened. Not quite sure how I managed that, but let's get rid of that. And let's check the other side. I'm doing this in the front view because I have an easier time seeing it. It looks like I had a little extra stub of a line that I drew by accident. So let me go ahead and join those back, and we'll jump back into perspective. Sorry about that. And we'll do a radius of, or excuse me, a diameter of 0.5. And there it is. So what we're going to do to create this is to do something called a sweep. And a sweep basically says take a cross-section curve and push that curve along another curve. And so we're going to use this circle as our cross-section curve, and we're going to use this curve here as what is called the rail. And so you could imagine this like you were on a train or a roller coaster or something where there's a rail, there's a track, and your object follows along the track. Right? So this piece here is going to be my track. So I'm going to do something called a sweep one rail, and I can do that by going to Surface, Sweep one rail, or type Sweep one. Right? And it's going to say first thing is to select the rail. Okay, so this would be my rail. And then it's going to say select cross-section curves. That would be my cross-section curve. And then I'll go ahead and hit Enter. And it's going to say drag the seam point. Usually the defaults are just fine. And I'll go ahead and hit Enter. And then we get the Sweep one rail options. Okay? So if we look at this, and I'm going to switch into shaded mode here so you can see it a little bit better. Basically what it's done is it's taken that curve and it's followed that curve along the curve that I drew to create a rod or a tube that goes along that direction. Okay? If I change the style to one of these others, like road-like top, and we click Preview, yeah, we're not going to get any. I'll do another example that changes this. Let's go back to freeform. There we go. And so I'll go ahead and say OK. And so it's now built out that particular shape. Okay? I'm not dependent upon the circle as the shape. So let me copy this a few more times. All right? And let's say that instead of a circle, I drew something like that, a pentagon. Right? If I did sweep one, again, rail first, then cross-section curve, hit Enter, we can see that it's now that shape rather than the circle. So it doesn't matter what the cross-section curve is. Okay? Furthermore, it doesn't matter where the object is in relation to the rail. They don't have to be touching or overlapping. So I could have this object over here, and I could still sweep it across this rail. So if I do sweep one, that's still my rail. There's my cross-section curve. There's my seam, and it will do the same It'll just follow next to it. Does that make sense? So it doesn't have to be touching or contained within the object that you're trying to sweep. You just have to have it, you have to know where it's going to go. And it'll match. Okay? It doesn't really matter for right now. A lot of people like to think of it as it's in the center or it's connected to the rail because it makes more intuitive sense. That's fine. I just wanted to point out they're not dependent on one another. Okay, so let's say I'm going to do a few more examples before, so I'm going off on a tangent here for a second. Let's say that we had a curve. Hold on a second. Okay, let's say we had a curve like this. And I have to move these up in 3 dimensions a little bit, so bear with me. All right, so let's say we had a curve that looked like this. Right? It's going up and down in 3 dimensions. Right? This was a very simple curve. I can do the same thing from a curve like this. So let me go ahead and create just a rectangle on the end here, something like that. And then I'm going to rotate 3D so that this is then down in cross-section, something like that. Okay? So I can then use this as my rail and this as my object, and I can build this. Basically, I'm building kind of a ramp. Okay? So let's go to sweep 1. Right? Rail first, cross-section curve next. Enter. There's my seam. Let's go ahead and I'll say OK for what? And of course, my example won't work, right? All right, give me a second. All right, let me try this one more time here. So sweep 1, there's my rail, there's my cross-section curve, there's my seam. There we go. So in this instance, right, because it's freeform, right, as it approaches these corners, it banks, so to speak. So you can see it's more like a ribbon where it's wrapping, right? I could instead, and I'm going to back up and do the sweep again, rail, cross-section curve. I could choose road-like top, and it's going to keep the surface basically flat as it goes across, and then flat as it comes down. It's a little bit harder to see. So this is more like a road would be. Right? So we have different options depending on how you do it. Okay? And you can see that because of the way I created it and the way the curve moves, this is responding and going down, right, rather than up. So in this instance, right, we're relying on just one rail. We can, however, right, have 2 rails. So let's say I copy this and I put this rail on that side. Okay? I can do a sweep. So once again, we'll go up to surface. Instead of sweep 1 rail, we're going to sweep 2 rails. It's going to say first rail there, second rail there, cross-section curve there. And I'll go ahead and hit enter. And I'll say OK. And now you can see that it's following along much better. Right? It's keeping it perfectly flat along because I have 2 rails that it's going from. Does that make sense? Okay? Now, if, however, and again, I'm going off on a tangent trying to explain the sweep a little bit more than what you're building today. So you don't have to actually build all this stuff. I'm just trying to give you examples. Right? Let's say that instead of having two curves that were identical, say I had one curve that was different than the other. So let me take, oh, come on. Take these, and move these over like that. Okay, so now I have two curves in space, right, but they get further apart. If I do a sweep two rails, first rail, second rail, incidentally, I'm not pressing enter in between, right? It's expecting just one rail, therefore it moves on, so you don't have to commit to. And then it'll immediately go to cross-section curve. Then I'll press enter. There's the seam. Now in this case, right, because the curves get further away, my cross-section gets bigger. So it doesn't stretch the cross-section, it actually grows the cross-section. Right? So up here, where the curves are further away, the cross-section gets bigger. And then it goes back down. But you can start to see the flexibility with how you create this. Yeah?
It scales it bigger?
Right, it scales the cross-section bigger. So it gets thicker and wider at the same time. So if I had a different shape, I had a rectangle here. If I had something, let's see here. Come on. All right, let's say I was sweeping this. So it's a sweep, two, first rail, second rail, cross-section curve. This will be a little bit easier to see. Right? So I start at, there's my shape. As it gets bigger, you can see the cross-section gets a lot bigger, and then it goes back to being smaller. Okay? So the side effect of a sweep two rails is that the shape, the cross-section is going to get bigger or smaller depending on how far apart those two rails are. If I went back to just having one, right, when I did it, let me take this, oops, wrong end, take this, and one of the curves, and I did a sweep one, and I'm going to go back to freeform on this. Right, we can see that the cross-section stays the same rather than getting bigger. Okay, so that's a primary difference between sweep one and sweep two. Anyway, all of that was just side note for what we're actually making. So let me come back here to this. I'm going to press Z, enter, and then S for selected so that I'm working just on my object. And I'm going to get rid of these other objects for right now. Okay, so now I have this little tube that I've created. The next thing that I need to do is to create some little extrusions on the ends that represent some little hockey pucks or some little clamps. And so I'll go ahead and I could choose to use one of the presets. I could use a cylinder, or I could do a curve and extrude it and cap it. Two different ways of doing it. You get the same results. So from here, I'm going to go right here to the center, and I can specify either a radius or a diameter. I'm asking for 1.5 inches in diameter, so I'll press D for diameter, and then 1.5 inches. And it would help, instead of typing 0.5, if I actually typed 1.5, 1.5 inches. There we go. And now, what did I say? 1/4 inch thick. So I'm going to say negative 0.25 inches here because I wanted it to go down. Okay. Once I have that piece, I can also mirror it across. So I'll go to mirror. I'll pick the midpoint, and I'll get my second one. I could also build the second one. It doesn't really matter which way you go about doing it. Okay. The other thing that happened is that this object ended up being below the ground plane, so I really should move the whole thing up. So let me take my objects here, and I'm going to go to Transform, Move, or just type Move. I'm going to press V for vertical, and then we'll go up by a quarter of an inch. And we can confirm by looking in the front view that yes, it's sitting on where the ground plane would be. All right, so I've gone ahead and I've made this first shape. Right? I'm going to do a little bit more with these buttons because ultimately this is going to have a piece of glass sandwiched between it. So I'm going to make a copy of these buttons. And when I do copy, this is transform copy. Again, I have the ability to say that this is a vertical copy. So I want it to go down, so I'm going to say vertical. And we'll make a copy from here. And I'm going to go down a ½ inch. Oops, it would help if I did negative 0.5 inches. There we go. And I'll hit enter to finish, and then I have to get rid of these extras. All right, so I just built that little extra piece. We can do this later. It doesn't really matter. Right, and I don't actually specify it in this assignment, but it'll look better as we go forward. Okay, so I have this piece ready, but I'm going to ultimately make another cross of this piece. So let me take this, and I'm going to go to Edit, Copy. Right, and then I can go to Edit and Paste, and it's going to give me a second copy of it. Right, if I type Move, right, there's the second copy. Right, I could also go to Transform, Copy, and which is going to give me different options. Point to copy from. Right, this would be if I wanted to copy from, say, here. Point to copy to, I can copy it there. Just different options. Okay, so now that I have that together, I'm going to use the Move command. And a lot of you, or not necessarily all of you yet, but a lot of you will encounter something called the gumball. And the gumball is something that Rhino builds in that when you select an object, it's going to give you this icon, right? That's going to be a green arrow, a blue arrow, a red arrow, and a few arcs, right? This works really nicely for some people, and other people absolutely hate it, right? I happen to be one of the people who absolutely hates it. Right? But I want to point it out because it does have value, and some people really like it. So for example, if I wanted to rotate this object with the gumball showing, right, I can click on where this arc is, and I can choose to rotate the object. I didn't have to go into the rotate command. I can just click on it. If I hold down Shift, it'll jump to the 90 degrees. Okay? So some people find that to be very quick to work with. Right? For me, I would rather actually type rotate and control where I rotate from rather than just the general center of this object. Right? For example, if I want this object to move and line up exactly in the center of this object, with the gumball, I can pick up this and I can move it, but my snaps don't really work. So if I snap to the midpoint, we can see that they're not really in alignment anymore. Right? So the gumball works, but it's not quite as precise. So for me, I would rather have the gumball turned off, and I would rather type move, or go to Transform Move, snap from this point to that point, and know that the two intersect. Right? So to me, that's a little bit easier to work with. There will come a point in time where we're dealing with texture mapping where using the gumball is actually really, really useful, and even I use it. Right? But I at least want to point that out because some people model with it on, some people model with it off, and I think it's worth your effort to experiment with it a little bit and decide whether it's right for you. Okay? So I now have those two pieces crossing, which was my desire, and I'm going to do one more rotate. And so again, if we had the gumball on, I could do it with the gumball, or right, I could leave it turned off, and I can do a rotate. And I'm going to go right from here, and I'm going to rotate it at 45 degrees. So let me go ahead and turn ortho on, and then this time I'm actually just going to type 45 because I know I want it to be 45, which is going to rotate it right like that. Okay? So the next piece of this puzzle is going to test your modeling abilities a little bit more and reinforce what we're doing, and that is that we're going to make a pole that stands up from the center of this object here, right, and then has a little loop on the end. And so I'm going to build it over here and then ultimately move it across as part of this little spider clamp. Okay? So the next thing that I'm going to do, hold on, I want to make sure that I didn't skip anything. Good. There's a drawing on the back that gives us some dimensions of what this looks like. What I need is a line, and I'm going to model it over here. That is 1 foot 9 1/4. So 1 foot. Now, if you have to type in 9 1/4 is 9.25, right? So I could do 1 foot 9.25 inches. That would be fine, right? And it would give me a line that's 1 foot 9.25 inches. Okay. If you don't know, I mean, 1/4 inch is 0.25. That's an easy one to know. But let's say it's 5/8 of an inch, and you don't know that it's 0.625 off the top of your head. We could actually type it in. And so I could be drawing, and I could say 1 foot, and then it's 9 dash 1/4. Right? So it's 9 dash 1/4 inches, and that would give us the same result. Right? So I like to point that out, because if you're not quick at converting 5/8 or whatever into actual decimal values, this is the easy way of doing it. So you can still use those numbers when you type them in. Okay? So it doesn't matter which one of these I use, they're exactly the same. I'm going to work with this one. So the first thing that I need to do is to create that first sweep, that's the straight. So let me go ahead and go to my circle. It's going to be the same diameter as before. So I will say it's 0.5 inches in diameter. And then I want to rotate 3D so that I can follow this curve. So let me go to rotate 3D. There it is. Right? And now I can do that sweep 1. There's my rail. There's my cross-section curve. And there's my shape. Okay? Now some of you are saying, wait a minute, why didn't I just go here, go to the cylinder, and say I want it to be 0.5, and I want the height to be 1 foot 9, 9.25 inches, right? It's the same thing, right? The only difference is that this one doesn't have caps on the end, and this one does have caps on the end. Actually, it doesn't have caps. Does it have caps? Yeah, it has caps on the end. Okay? It's the only difference. 2 ways of modeling. It's just dependent on what is easiest for you. This, however, won't be as easy when we do the little circle on the end. Okay? So right here is going to be my center point for this circle, and we're ultimately going to do a trim. And so what I'm going to do is I'm going to draw a circle that is the outside diameter of what I want, which says on the back that it's 1 3/4 inches. So my diameter is going to be 1.75 inches. There's my outer diameter. I need the inner diameter, which is supposed to be 3/8 of an inch, I believe. Yep, tension cable at 3/8 of an inch. So I'll start at the center here, and my diameter is 3/8 of an inch. So 3/8. I don't know what 3/8 is off the top of my head. Okay, and so now I end up with these 2 circles. I have an inner and an outer little diameter. Okay, what I need is I need a circle that goes between. I need the cross section of what this is. And I could do the math. I could say whatever, 1 3/4 inches in diameter minus 3/8, and then divide it in half to get the diameter of this circle. But it would be a whole lot easier in my head if I used the circle command, but instead of the one that starts in the center, I said I want the diameter, and I'm just going to specify the diameter. So I go to the second option here. Start of diameter, right, is going to be right there. End of diameter is going to be right there. That was a lot easier than trying to do math and figure it out. Okay? So let me hide this for just a second so that you can see it a little bit better. Right? So now I have an outer circle, an inner circle, and I have whatever the cross-section is going to be. I need the cross-section to be up in the 3rd dimension, so I'll use that rotate 3D again. And you can see that I use rotate 3D very, very frequently, more frequently than regular rotate. Okay? So you're going to get used to rotate 3D. So there's my cross-section curve, and let me fold this up. It looks like this. So now that I have this shape, I have my cross-section and I have my rail, I can do my sweep. And I could do a sweep 2 or I could do a sweep 1. It won't make any difference. They're going to end up being the same. So for argument's sake, let's do a sweep 2 rails. Right? I'll say this is my first rail, there's my second rail, there's my cross-section curve, and I hit enter, and now I have the little donut that's on the end, right, of my rod. So let me go ahead and get back what I had before, and now we can start to see that I'm building this up. Okay? So now it's a matter of I need to do some trimming. So let's take this object and type trim, and we'll trim off those pieces, right, so that we can see through the little donut. Okay. I could take it one step further. I could actually trim this all the way back to the surface over here. If we were 3D printing it, we'd want to clean it up that way so we didn't have an extra surface. And so if I were doing that, I'd switch into wireframe mode so I could see it a little bit better. And I'd type trim, and then I'd come in here and I'd get rid of that part. Right, and then switch back to shaded mode.
Go back to the line.
Oops. So I had this.
No,
Right.
No,
I hadn't trimmed this yet.
You seem to have a line in the middle that says that one.
This one. That's just a line.
Okay.
Right, that was the line that I used to create this shape.
But it was still sticking through when you trimmed everything else?
Probably because I didn't select it.
Oh.
So let's go to trim, and I'm going to switch to wireframe. The other thing that can be useful is if you go to ghosted mode, because you can still see a little bit more through it. Sometimes that's helpful. So we can go ahead and get rid of that there. We can get rid of that, get rid of that, get rid of that. I could click on that line there. That line's gone now. All right, and I'll go ahead and hit enter now that I'm done. And there's my object. Let me switch back into solid mode so we can see it a little bit better. And so now I need to rotate this object up. So I'm going to use rotate 3D again. So I'll select the object, transform, rotate 3D. We'll start here. And we'll fold it up into space. Okay. Now I'm going to move this object on top of this. Now the measurements that I gave you specify that the length, right, this should go right on top of that arc. All right, so let me go ahead and go to move, and I'll go from this point and it's not going to let me. Let's see if we can, let's go right there. All right, so now I end up with that. Okay. In reality, I think I measured it slightly short, so this should go up, move, oops, move, vertical, can't type, 0.25. Right, which means that that doesn't intersect the way that I want it to. So I need to make this piece a little bit longer. Right, so I have different options for how to do that. I could scale 1D, for example. I could add a little piece, or I could just leave it the way I had it, where it was moved a little bit shorter. Doesn't matter. Okay, so now I have this particular piece. I want one more little rod that goes out that represents that tension cable. So let me go up here to the center, and I can do a sweep again. And in reality, it might be faster to do a cylinder, but since we're practicing sweeps, that's what I'm going to keep reinforcing. So we'll do that at 6 feet. There. And I need a little circle. So I'm going to go there to. I'm going to do the circle in the front view. So that I don't have to rotate it. All right. And so now I'm going to do a sweep. 1. There's my rail. And there is my curve. I'll hit enter. There's the seam. I'll go ahead and say OK. Okay, so I end up with the little tension cable there. I know it's floating in space. Obviously, a tension cable can't float in space, but ultimately it will work out. So I have those done. Let me see if I ask you today. Yeah, I'm going to go ahead and put the piece of glass in too. So the piece of glass, right, is a 4x6 sheet of glass. I can start it at 0.00, which is fine. And this is going to be at 4 feet, 6 feet. And it's going to be, what did I say, a 1/4 inch thick, 0.25. Should be negative 0.25. There it is. And we can see that it fits in between those two little hockey pucks. Right? But it's not quite in the right place. I need it to line up with the center of this. Now I happen to know that this is in a 1 foot square. right? So if I move it 6 inches and 6 inches, it's going to be in the right spot. So let me go ahead and type move, and we'll go over 6 inches, and then we'll go up 6 inches. And there it is. Okay? So ultimately, this little piece is going to be rotated so that it's vertical. And I'll show you how this comes together. We're not going to combine them together. You're just making the one piece today. Next class, we'll combine them together. But just for the interest of showing you of where it's going, I'll take this, rotate 3D. All right, so let's say I have this. Let me oops. One more time. Sorry. Skipped one. So you can see that we can really quickly create a whole glass wall with all of these pieces on it. Okay, there's more to it. Structurally, this isn't sound, right? Let's not get into a structural debate over it. But the point is, I'm having you build something that we can use as a backdrop for your bridge. So ultimately, we'll put your bridge in front of it. We'll have this glass wall behind it, and you'll have a little rendering. Okay. So in terms of what you're turning in today, you are turning in just the one. Let me back up here. Just the one piece here, but I would like you to try to apply some materials to it. So we'll apply to this part. We'll apply metal, right, to all of this part, and we'll apply glass to this part. So we'll load up those materials. Right, click on the little M for material editor. I'm going to right click and say load material. And I'm going to go into metal. And you can pick anything you want. Let's I'll use silver. That's fine. All right. I'll take this and I'll apply a material to selection. And then I also need glass. I'm going to load material. Glass is tricky because we don't have a lot of sky or anything yet. So I'm going to pick just basic glass. And I'll go ahead and click open. But we're probably not going to see much out of it today. So I'll go ahead and pick on this object and say apply material to selection. And then I can go ahead and I can render this object. Oh, it's against black. Hold on. Let me go to my options, my environment, and I'm going to change the background to be white. I'll say OK. And I should probably throw a little sun or a little directional light in. Something like that. And let me throw an infinite plane in. And let me take everything but the infinite plane and just move it up a bit so we can see it. There we go. And then we'll go ahead and render. Okay. This is going to be very difficult to see because the glass is completely transparent, right? But you'll end up with a little view that has your little clamp in it. It's also reflecting a bunch of the ground and all the white that's around it, so your results basically aren't that good yet. There are a few things that you can do, and again, this part is optional. If I go to my materials and I go to basic glass, there's something called fog color. If I can find it. Fog color. I'm going to change this to be slightly blue. It's going to look really blue here, but when I actually put it in the scene, it won't be. And we'll see if we can see it a little bit better. Maybe a little too blue. but we're seeing that there is glass there. So let me go back and change that color so it's not quite so bright. Something like that. Not quite enough. Not quite enough. So you have to play around with what the right value is. Well, anyway, something that you can play around with as you go forward. So the image that you're going to post today is roughly this image. If it's not the best image in the world, it's not a problem. Okay. The point is that I want you to practice making this shape, right? And that's the challenge of it. Okay. Are there any questions? I know I went through fairly fast. Do recognize that on the website here, if I can get there. If you go to today's lecture, so we'll go to Fall 2015, Lecture 206, right? I always post the video. It usually takes me about a day to post today's lecture, but there's also generally links, and of course today would be the example where I didn't have it, to any previous lectures. Let me go back a lecture to 205. Right? So here's an example, right? Here's lecture 206. I have the numbers are slightly different because last year I was a day ahead. Anyway, if you click on the previous lecture, right? This was building components part 1. It'll take you to last year's lecture, right? That'll explain basically the same things that I talked about. Does that make sense? Right? So even if I haven't posted this year's lecture, there'll be last semester or several semesters back to go through as an example. Okay, so I just want you to know that it's there should you need to go back and review something. All right. Any other questions? Nope. All right.